Hello, and welcome to EPR with your favorite environmental nerds, Nic and Laura. On today's episode, Nic and I discuss our flawless sense of direction. We talk to Daron Duke about archaeology, ancient footprints, and working collaboratively. And finally, per Reader's Digest, according to genetic evidence, more than 90% of modern humans descended from a small population of Homo sapiens that left Africa about 60,000 years ago. Researchers thought that superior tools, including fine stone blades that could be used on the ends of spears, was one of the main reasons for their success. But a site in southern India was evidence that people there had advanced tools more than 200,000 years ago. Whether that means that human ancestors left Africa in waves or that different hominids came up with similar innovations separately is unknown, but very interesting.
Yeah, there you go. Archaeology. One day we'll figure it out, maybe. How cool is it?
When we get that time machine.
Yeah.
Hit that music.
Great news, everyone. EPR is doing an Ask Me Anything on Wednesday, April 12th at 8 p.m. Eastern on our YouTube channel at EPR Podcast. Laura and I will be available for you to ask us about career advice, our favorite toppings on pizza, or anything else that crosses your mind.
Movies.
Mark your calendars. See you there. Did you say cool beans?
I said movies.
Movies.
Why is it so late?
It's so late, so our East Coast friends or West Coast friends can join.
Cool.
So ask us anything. I'll fix that in post.
I was trying to add some FAQ in there.
That would be good.
How do I join?
You just go to www.youtube/@EPR podcast. That's how you join. They're great questions. These are great questions. And I'll answer them in the exact same way when we're doing it.
Will I have to talk or can I type my questions?
You can talk or type. Either way, I think. Yeah, for
awesome.
sure.
I'll be there.
Yeah, me too.
We might even have some friends from past podcasts.
That's true. But let's not give away everything. Yeah, let's not promise what we can't deliver. So yeah,
no, I'm just making it up as we go.
Yeah.
All right. Cool. Beans. We have a sponsor today?
No, we do not.
Are you ready?
I am as ready as I'm going to be. We'll see how this goes.
30 seconds. Go.
Okay, Laura. The topic of the day is about, the internet, right? You know, we all live it. We all love it. We all use it. And there's a new, fascinating, and wonderful way to enjoy that internet. And that's what the company called Ebola. That's right, Ebola. That is an online platform that does stuff. And you might be wondering, what does it do? How do I use it? Great questions. I don't know those answers, but we do have at least 8 foosball tables in our WeWork station. So that's all I'm saying is it's great. It's wonderful. It's a new startup. It's got all the flashy designs. We've got, Teslas for everybody that shows up. And and a business model. I don't know what it is. I have no idea, but I'm sure it seems great. Our website is it too far? Okay, I'm done.
I don't know how to turn it off. Okay.
Dang it. I could have kept going. I was like, oh my.
I need a better buzzer.
Yeah. I couldn't hear it. I just saw your phone flap up. Perfect. Ebola. All right.
That was going well, though. I liked it.
Cool. Well, let's get to our segment then. Every time I've ever gone on the field to go down to a ditch, someone picks the wrong path. And it's never me.
Right.
Whoever's in front. So like, this will be safe. And you get like thorns, in every part of your body. You're like, this is the thickest brush. You couldn't find a simpler, easier way to get down here. They're like, what are you talking about? And then you get down there. You're like, you see that path right there? That one that we could have taken?
I know what you're talking about. I feel like I have experienced that. I can't think of any specific examples.
I was going to say, we actually had a guy, like a specific, when I was doing my field work in grad school, we called it a Dan path because he always chose the worst way. I'm like, what are you doing? Like, it's like walk around the bush, not through it. And he's like, oh yeah, that makes sense. I'm like, it's right there. I'm like, yes, but there's like 18 feet of just thicket. We can't get through that. We have to walk around so that we're not dead. I don't want to die from blood loss in the middle of the forest,
Yeah, I feel that. But I think my most recent experiences are with my own boyfriend. Anytime we go anywhere, even if it's just to the grocery store, he takes the longest route. I'm like, why are we going this way? But I'm like, well, I'm not driving, so whatever.
Yeah, I'm notorious for that. So it's, yeah. I get lost actually really easily. Like it's just like we all have strengths and weaknesses, Laura. This is strengths and weaknesses. Mine is sense of direction. No idea. Like I can go, like if I'm walking like to a grocery store, I'm like, all right, got my stuff. Cool. All right. Which way was it back? And I'd have to pull up my phone and look. I mean, it's bad. It's bad.
I'm usually pretty good, but this weekend we went to go see my dad's band play, which was fun. But I met my brother there, and I pull up. I'm in the neighborhood, and the map took me past my dad's house. I'd only been there once, and my brother goes by and he's like, his house is back there. I'm like, okay, well, I'll just follow you. And then we had to like park at his house and go to the clubhouse, and I have no idea where I am. And my brother's like, okay, turn here, turn there. We're like, how do you know where to go? And it's like, it's a grid. It's just a grid. I'm like, okay. It's not a grid. This one road goes curvy, and that throws the whole grid off.
Yeah. I mean, that's the whole problem with the East Coast, right? Is like nothing's a grid. Absolutely nothing's a grid. And that's part of it. And there's some joy. There is joy in getting lost, so they say. But that's what lost people tell people who have great senses of direction.
Right.
But no, I'm not so bad about my neighborhood. I know there's like a few pockets of places that I know pretty well, which is like really super surprising. I'm like, oh yeah, this is here, here, and here, and here. And it's like, how do you know that? I'm like, I don't know. Honestly, God, let's not question it. Let's just accept that today I know where I'm going. But yeah, otherwise, no, I'm totally out.
I think this is a problem we're all going to have the more we rely on like Google Maps and Apple Maps to tell us where we're going. It's like, you don't have to remember the street signs or any significant markings or anything to be like, I turn after the McDonald's and whatever. Right.
Well, it's funny because like, my dad was a police officer growing up. So like we were supposed to know. He would test us. We're on the road. He would call if we answered, big problem. But, if we pulled over to the side of the road, we had to tell him like where we are, what we're doing, kind of thing. And, which is, loving, of course. But
your dad just reminds me of, did you watch the show Psych?
Yeah. Yes,
your dad very much reminds me of Sean's father.
Yeah. It's very, very much like that.
How many hats are in the room, Nick?
Yeah, exactly. And I'm just like, I can't, I don't know, 700. And he's like, go to your room. I'm like, oh, thank God. Yeah. He was kind of like that. He always was like, you have to know what street you're on. If you're driving on the highway, you need to know mile markers. You have to pay attention to all this stuff because if you break down, you get in an accident and you can't tell people where you are, you could die. And, he's right. But at the same time, it was like, okay, Dad. Yeah. Thanks. So I don't know. It never stuck. I wish it did. I wish I had that imprinted for real. That'd be great.
Yeah. So are you saying that you might be the guy in the field who takes the long route?
I would definitely take the long route. Oh yeah. Like oh my gosh. Speaking of field stories, the very first time I went into the forest for when I was doing grad school work, brand new forest, never been there before, had no idea where it was. I'm by myself and I just walk like, an hour into the forest. That's a long way, And I'm like, all right, it's time to go back. And I turn around, look at the thing, and I'm like, I legit walked in circles. I had the GPS unit with me.
You're like, oh, there's the parking lot.
I walked in the circle. I walked in a full circle before I went back out. And I'm like, yeah, you should just keep that GPS unit up and follow it. It was pretty bad. That one, I was pretty embarrassed. I was like, man, I'm so glad no one saw that. Yeah, so definitely. I would definitely get lost. I don't know. Not you, though? Not you?
I can definitely get lost, I think. I don't think I'm inclined to get lost, but I'm also very cautious about like not getting lost. So I'm always trying to have my markers and be like, okay, here's a trail of peanuts I can follow on my way back or something.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, yeah. And it's funny. It's just, like I say, strengths and weaknesses. That's all it is.
All right. Well, let's get to our interview.
Sounds good. Hello and welcome back to EPR. Today we have Dr. Daron Duke, Principal and COO at Far Western Anthropological Research Group, and he's also the director of their Desert Branch office in Henderson, Nevada. Welcome, Daron.
Hi, how are you?
Doing great. Tell us a little bit about what you do.
Well, I'm an archaeologist. I'm a consulting archaeologist in private industry. So we follow federal law, even state law in California. that protects cultural resources. So lands like the Bureau of Land Management, U.S. Forest Service. I do a lot of work on military land. Those are the things, we get power lines, pipelines, et cetera. The military obviously does a lot of testing and training.
Mm-hmm.
But we do cultural resources surveys to clear those areas for development.
Yeah. And so when you do those surveys, when you're conducting those in the field, like what goes into that process? How do you start it? How do you end it?
Well, we get a job in a similar way to any consultant. We bid on it usually. Sometimes things come to us through ways we know or existing contracts or clients or whatever. But once we get the job in hand, then I'll speak for myself in, the Desert West where I usually work. Let's say it's the power line. We're going to get an area of potential effect, some kind of corridor probably that buffers out against the center line of that thing. And then we would do a ground survey of it. And out west, everything's pretty much on the surface. Not always the case. And that's one of the interesting wrinkles that we get to think about. But more or less, you're looking at the ground surface and walking all that with people on crews. And you get done and you record sites as you find them. And you make evaluations of their significance relative to the National Register of Historic Places. It's a process. Right. It's a regulation called Section 106. We do that, and then we help steer those clients the direction to avoid those things, or if they have to go through them and affect them, then we go to another phase where we might have to dig it or do enhanced recording or some other type of method.
Right. And I guess the typical things you find on a standard project would be, what would those things be?
Well, they are, we say pre-contact area, often called prehistory, but we don't really use that term as much anymore, but and historic era material. So the West obviously was part of American history, and important growth in American history, and especially in the 19th century and early 20th century. So we do a lot of recording of that kind of thing. The law has us usually working around, if it's 50 years old or older, we will record it. So a lot of historic era sites, mining and ranching and things like that. But then the bulk of it probably is the pre-contact area. So stone tools and pottery and things like that.
Yeah. And do you find, and I know archaeology is a pretty regional field. You've already alluded to what you do out west, and would probably be a little different than what would be in the east. Do you find that there's even regional differences within the West, certain areas where you find more of a certain type of artifact?
The sorts of things we find are similar. The tides of history through America are different on one side of the country versus the other in some ways. But we find much the same kinds of things, but we certainly find them differently. I'm from Oklahoma, and I started out east of the Rockies where, you're going through Arkansas or Oklahoma or Texas, and you don't see, there's been deposition where people were in the deeper past. And so usually you're going, and these survey lines, you throw a shovel probe down every 30 meters or the other interval and see what's in it. And then if you find something in it, you're digging in cardinal directions to keep trying to dead reckon it. One thing I like about being out west is that you can see the whole thing laid out and gives you a different sensibility. So that's a difference I think is meaningful in how archaeologists actually engage the record.
Wow, that's really cool. Did you always want to be an archaeologist, even as a kid, or is this what you kind of fell into?
Yeah, I did. I mean, I look at those National Geographic books in the 80s.
Yeah.
I still have one that had, King Tut's mask on the front of it from the early 80s. It was
yeah,
I couldn't get enough of that.
Yeah.
And when I got older, I went to the University of Oklahoma to do anthropology. And that was a question I had when I started, was did I just like this cool stuff I saw, and covers of National Geographic, or do I really like it? Because, you get into the more what do you do here? You don't look at gold masks. You look at, stone flakes and all that. But I I did field school. We went to Arizona. I was hooked, I was hooked. I loved it. I mean, mystery is one way to put it, but just the puzzle, really is a better way. I think of it. It's engaging. You think of people doing what are basically very human and somewhat unsurprising things, but the diversity with which they were done, that you can kind of forensically document that no one would ever know, is there if you have the wherewithal to work on it. And so that's what is compelling still about it for me.
Yeah. And as your career's kind of gone on, I mean, like, we always have we've talked a lot about it on the show. There's a transition from, you're doing the field work and then you become more of a managerial person. You do less field work. Do you still get to do a little of everything, or have you had to adjust to a less field experience?
Yeah, I do less field, but I keep my own pet things going. And it is true, like you kind of age out of on the ground all the time, it's kind of hard to let that go, to be honest, on some level. But there's also, as one of my colleagues said, Daron, you got to embrace the keyboard at some point. That's where the value of what you're doing is coming into play. Like, even if it is archaeology, writing that archaeology up is part of the mental engagement. That's fun too, on a certain level. I mean, deadlines and whatnot being the worst part about it, but it's the whole ball of wax. You go out in the field and you find it. You go to the keyboard and you document it. That's where you really learn. You take those ideas that came to you and you scrutinize them, turn them over, and if you can print them, you find you didn't even have it right. Most of what you said in the first place, until you really put it on paper. So the whole thing matters. And the transition has happened, but there are, I have this ongoing work in Utah that's kind of my little pet area that I've developed for 20 plus years. And that's the thing that scratches me where I itch on I go out, I run it, I do it, nobody else does kind of thing.
Yeah, I got you. And we'll definitely dive into that in a minute. It's a really cool project and I want to hear a ton about it. But like the idea, the things that you like, the things you're interested in, hunter-gatherer ecology and the lithic economy, those are like your key areas of interest. What's your 30-second elevator speech for what those are? Like, what are those?
Okay. How do you go from some stone flakes and tools laying on the ground that are over, 10, 12,000 years old, and say something about how people moved about the entire landscape, what kind of groups they were in, what they emphasized in terms of what they ate, where they moved, and then even better, how their society was, how was it maybe at least generally organized, so you can understand what their life was like on some scale you can relate to. That's what I think those two things come in and do for us to learn about.
Yeah. And over time, and this might even slide into your project in Utah, but how you've gone about solving the puzzle, so to speak. There's been a lot of advancements in technology that have been used in archaeology, and I would say there's been a ton, even in the last 10 years or so. So how has the use of technology helped you identify and solve these puzzles that you find?
Well, the things we've learned primarily have come by old methods. There's no new technology that really takes over for walking around and looking and being on the ground, right? But new technologies are a major enhancement to that on the back end especially, and they can be used to help the search as well. So, for example, ground penetrating radar is something we're going to be doing more of, and it's key to like really resolving what we could not just with a shovel or a trowel or observation, because we can see underground without peeling anything back.
Yeah, without digging all those holes you need.
Well, we could talk a little bit more about it. We get into some of the details of the Utah stuff, but new technologies they're key to, especially not so much as finding things as they are the preservation and protection of resources once you know what they are. How do you put them in museums? Maybe you can't put the thing in the museum, or you wouldn't take it out, or Native American tribes in the region want them dealt with differently rather than, plucked out and moved around. Right. New technologies allow us to gather information and extract that without having to affect the artifacts or the sites or whatever. It's really good.
Well, yeah. So let's talk about your project in Utah. It's really genuinely incredible. Utah Test and Training Range is where it is. So what can you tell us about it?
Well, I started working for the military in, I think it was early 2001. And already it was known there was something going on out there. And this is a training range for the same reason a lot of the training ranges out west exist. That it's a big empty space that the military, wasn't taking anybody's farmland away or anything like that. This is the Great Salt Lake Desert floor. This is what people would be familiar with looking at Bonneville Speedway, salt flats, absolutely zero of anything. So why not test bombs on it? That's what the military said 60 plus years ago.
Right.
It turns out that there was a vast wetland out there at the end of the Pleistocene as a major ice age lake called Lake Bonneville receded as things turned warm. We moved into the Holocene. And that lake, which covered half of western Utah, is now the kind of Great Salt Lake, which is but a puddle to the original lake, as great as it is.
Yeah.
As that receded a lot, there was overflow of water coming in from all sides, and you would have had, because it's such a big basin, one of the biggest wetland areas in the entire Desert West. It would have been a oasis, a huge oasis, a wetland full of everything, the entire flyway of waterfowl would have been oriented on it. I mean, the animals, everything. So these people around, 12 to 13,000 years ago, can't say they're the first people around. We don't know. It looks like there were people around earlier in the Desert West, but it's the first material way that we can see that people had, this was probably a big draw. It sort of expanded about 13,000 years ago and probably brought a lot of people's attention there. And so they did that, and then that place dried up about 9,000 years ago. And people in the past really have avoided the central part of that desert flat since that time, by and large. I mean, of course, they knew it was there, but they lived and operated in areas around the basin because that was gone. So you have an archaeological record that is A, not common everywhere because it's so old, but B, not mixed with other stuff. And from an archaeologist's perspective, you want to see things that aren't mixed, because we know that a projectile point of some type goes to some time a lot of times, but all the other things around that aren't diagnostic like that, you don't always know. But with this, we can look at the entire sweep of their technology and say things, because we know that they are from this general time frame.
That's great. And it leads me to my next question, which is kind of like, so basically an area like this also allows you to identify when a group of people were first using certain tools, not just the obvious ones, but pottery and other things like that. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it's first evidence. We can just see people on the ground really out there. Because they're using stone lithic technology, they're just leaving it everywhere. The pattern's out, we get to look at and examine. That's what I've done most of the last 20 years doing, is looking at the distribution of those things and timing of those things. And it's been the last few years we've found some newer wrinkles that give us a little more insight into their culture and society.
Yeah. So what are those wrinkles? What have you found over this time?
Well, we started to focus on an area a few years ago that was really intriguing, but we found evidence of people using tobacco, which had not been demonstrated back to such a time, back over 12,000 years. And then last year, we found footprints are just being exposed that look like we're going to work on that this summer. We know that they look like they're about 12,000 years. They could be a little bit later than that, but certainly in the Pleistocene, Holocene transition time, some 9 to 13,000 years ago is what these footprints. And it looks like, but what I'm saying is, I think they're based on all the data we have that we've been working on for 2 decades now about the stratigraphy and everything. We have a very strong set of data that suggests they kind of go along with that general area, those certain kinds of points, the tobacco seeds at this one hearth at a site nearby. And we think we're seeing these people living their lives in this general area when it was available. And it's just now kind of eroding out of the ground.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So actually first, I love the way the footprints were discovered. Is it true you were really just driving along? Is that what happened? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, yes, but yeah, luck is the residue of design, perhaps. I brought someone who'd seen him before out, right? That's step one is
Right.
no pun intended. The guy was with Tommy Urban. He does ground penetrating radar, and he is the guy he was working at White Sands, where you may be familiar. It was in the news. White footprints were found at White Sands, and that made a lot of news. They're purportedly over 22,000 years old. That's up for some debate, according to some, but regardless, they are footprints, and they're interlaced with footprints of megafauna like mammoths and camels, and so they're very interesting. And they were found at White Sands in Mexico. Well, I just said that, that context looks a lot like our context. And I have the kind of deposition. What's happening out in the Great Salt Lake Desert is the wind is just peeling grain by grain the surface of the desert away.
Yeah.
And what maybe used to be a thick amount of sediment has been just peeling away. And now it's gotten down to this 12,000 year layer. That's how, it sounds so weird it would even be out there.
Right,
That's how it's out there. Yeah. What's interesting is it's kind of like mud out there. And so if you are below the surface, you have this like pristinely protected place. It's the opposite of looking like a peat bog, but chemically it's sort of operating like one where there's no oxygen, it's kind of damp and everything is just really secure. But the minute it's at the surface, man, the wind is going to destroy. So
yeah,
that's a little backup on why you can even see this. But I thought, well, I'm going to call this guy up, and we conceived a little kind of pilot study, like I'll pay you to come out for a couple days. And what we found wasn't what I had in mind. We had this other site we were working on. I thought maybe people walking around their own campfire would be a thing you'd see. But in fact, now I know that's not exactly the context you'd look for. What we found is what you should look for. But he came out, and it's true. Like day one, what I didn't know at the time is the people of White Sands are dying to have a second case so they don't look so lonely. Right. Nobody believes us. There's got to be, if we have them, someone's got to have them. And they had noticed the Great Salt Lake Desert is like a place to wheel around on Google Earth and wonder.
Right.
He got out there. We drove out in the middle of the basin where this is, and he started to get, I could tell he was looking around, and he was like, man, this place just looks, there's got to be potential. And I said, well, what would they look like? Just somebody's footprint, I guess. And he really just said they look kind of like that, and looked like he wanted to jump out of the car before I stopped it. And sure enough, that's it.
That is so funny. What? Yeah. Well, I guess the odds. Yeah.
I thought for sure, well, he doesn't know. We've been surveying out here. We've done all kinds of things, and even wet, damp conditions where boot prints or whatever might endure. Mm-hmm. But in the end, these are bare footprints, and the real proof was in excavating a few of them and seeing how they were formed.
Oh, wow. So how are they formed? What goes into that when you excavate?
Well, I excavated, it was the third one that I excavated that I knew that I had. He only had a couple days. And then the military, as they do sometimes, is tell you can't go out one day just because they have flights or whatever. And so he only really had a day. And we did his GPR over one of the trackways. We ultimately counted 88 footprints that we saw.
Wow. Yeah.
And he left, and I had some other people out doing other projects, but I kind of went to my hotel room and read up more intensively, their articles that they had written on what this looks like, subsurface and everything. And I kind of tried to follow the instructions. I went out there, I kind of tested, I found some animal prints, and I just worked on those because I didn't want to get into the other stuff yet, see if I knew what I was doing. And finally, I decided I had to go try. I went to one footprint that was a little benign looking, and I didn't see anything. And I thought, this is going to be hard. I don't know. Tried another one, and I still couldn't, it just wasn't making any sense. I was like, this is maybe not going to work out. I don't know what's going on here. I thought, well, I think I just need to peel back a little layer, about a centimeter, And so I went to a third one that I knew was a footprint. I mean, we had measured them out. We could see that they were someone was walking. Whether they were doing it in the past or recently was the question.
Right.
I had noticed I felt with the trowel sand in the middle of those other little boxes I put around those, but I couldn't see anything. So the third one, I did it in a really nice way, very smooth and clean, like just a little shoebox size thing around what looked like the print. And I felt sand in the middle again, but I was like, man, this is a hokum. I don't know. I'm going to go. I went back to my vehicle and ate an apple and sat there and kind of mumbled about it and thought, yeah. And then I went back over to the print, 15 minutes. It developed like a Polaroid, I swear, because the differential between the salt that's out there and, mud versus sand, all of a sudden this thing just looked like a foot. There it was, a bare footprint. And that's when I knew the whole thing was legitimate. So we worked for a few days digging some more to vet the whole thing.
That's really cool.
And maybe to answer your question a little more directly, what they were doing, what I know now from digging them, the prints were full of sand, like pure sand, like you could buy at a Home Depot kind of place.
Right.
What it is sand that was from a stream that was in this wetland that doesn't exist anymore. And people were walking, it looks like about ankle deep in it, but the substrate was mud and there's sand flowing through here. And so the minute they pulled their foot out, all this sand rushed in behind them and left a perfect casting of their footprint, toes and everything.
Yeah.
And you can see there was another one I dug that had this kind of rivulet going into it, like you would know if you walked on the beach or whatever. Sometimes the water rushes in and kind of obscures your print immediately. That kind of thing was happening. So there hadn't even been that kind of sand there for at least about 10,000 years.
Wow.
So there's no way to duplicate that process that's later.
Yeah. Wow. And so you have the prints, they're prints, and now you're kind of using what the prints are doing to inform about what the people at this time were doing. So what did you learn on that side of things too? So what do the prints tell us basically about what they were doing?
Well, this is something we want to learn more about this year when we do a little more work. But even with what minimal we did, we learned that we have more than we have a family. I told you earlier, like, what do we learn from stone tools and their presence? But it could have been some guys hunting, and some people, we don't know what do these sites mean. Well, we know that there were adults and children. We had at least, and the size of footprints is pretty well understood within a range, age level. And it looked like we had at least some kind of like 5 to 7 year old, maybe some 10 to 13 year old, and then adult. They're small. The adult prints were small. Maybe that means they were female, or maybe everyone just had smaller footprints. We don't know that stuff yet. But the point is, we had adults and children. And that's something we don't learn about the past, under normal circumstances. So
right.
May seem benign and normal, but it's just cool.
Oh yeah, 100%. And so the people that are there, adults and children, do we have a sense of what they were doing? Is this a communal area where a lot of people were coming to, or were they passing through? Well,
what we know about the stone tools, there's something we do called obsidian sourcing. Like they used obsidian, this volcanic glass, and a related volcanic material that's a little more grainy. We usually call it fine grained volcanic stone, but it's like basalt or something. And we can chemically source those. They have like a chemical fingerprint to the geologic source they come from. And we know at the time that these people early in these times in the Great Basin, they moved a lot and a long way. Those stone tools show us people moving hundreds of miles. So they were mobile. Usually have small sites. They didn't stay at them that long. They moved on. And so that's why the question, who exactly is doing this? The whole family move that much, or maybe just some people of it?
Right.
But here we see what we think are people who would have been here for a short time before moving on up to Idaho, on down to southern Utah. That's the sweep of what we understand that folks at that time were doing. But what they were doing at the time was walking. Perhaps they were collecting food. Perhaps they were just enjoying themselves, for all I know. But they're walking in shallow water if you're out in a wetland, I mean, the water sometimes is the best place to walk around, depending on
Yeah.
what you do. But we know they were, out in this marshland in the water. And based on the way the prints are formed, sometimes they're really deep. It looks like a little more muddy. Maybe somebody went a little farther out. But where you have an actual trackway, you can't be sloshing around too much, kind of in the shallows.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's like I said, this is on military installation. So how has the military kind of helped with the whole process you have going on here?
Well, the military's been critical to it all along the way. Like I said, that I've been working there for over 20 years, and they are excellent stewards of the cultural resources. They have a job to do, a mission to accomplish about testing and training weapons, but they do that in certain areas. Those areas get cleared by people like me and other environmental professionals, and they can do that work, and they're very careful to not be destructive in this regard. And their stewardship of the archaeological record is excellent, and it's why the continued work to really work with the tribes and protect and preserve what's there have become highlighted.
Yeah, and that's incredible. And it's incredible stuff. I'm really glad to hear it. It's funny, one of the things I've talked about on the show before is the military does a great job on natural resources too, in lots of areas, in lots of ways. And some bases care more about than others, but like the MacDill Air Force Base, right? It's built in the absolute worst possible spot they could have picked. They're just like, well, it's gross here. No one cares, right? We'll build this in the 40s. And then they're like, it sure does flood here all the time. And now we know the whole thing is within the 100-year floodplain. 90% of it's wetland. There's 15 endangered species, and including like in the water and birds on land. So they get it from both ends. They can't go into the water. They can't go out of the water. But they really appreciate everything that's there, and they care very much about manatees. They cancel projects that are going to affect them. They have done a whole lot of work in that area to support and maintain the things that they have, and very, very neat. They even work around it. They're like, yeah, well, if we need to build, instead of building new, we demolish and then rebuild, so that we're not increasing our footprint in the floodplain, because we know it's bad for lots of reasons. But it's been really cool to see. I think a lot of people don't get that.
And I'll pretend like you just asked me another question and say, the military and our work with them, and even in other environmental work, is a great example of how environmental laws work at their best. Mm-hmm. Because, as you said, some of these bases are put in places that, just because you couldn't mine them or farm them, that's kind of why they put them where they belong. But then you find out nature doesn't need to mine or farm anything, and many of these places are basically nature preserved. Now they're protected. The military can accomplish their mission. And when the big pitfall of being an environmental professional is getting in the way, right? Yeah. It's when you throw up hurdles instead of means by which people can get things done, because you live in this world. You need power, and you need things that come from the industrial world. How do you navigate somebody who has a shared interest in protecting, if it's reasonable? You have to go in there and you work with them to work with the laws. And when they do it in a way they feel they're able to accomplish their mission and do it efficiently, everybody up the chain looks good, and it's good for everybody, and it's good for the environment. Yeah,
absolutely. And it's what is it? Things like Eglin Air Force Base having the largest population of red-cockaded woodpeckers in the country, and it's 1,000 acres that it's never going to be touched. That forest is there because they do forest training, and it's kind of a really incredible thing. So I love when that all comes together. Really, really great point. So you guys are going back out this year to do some more work again. And so it's whenever this stuff happens, whenever we have a site like this on the military, so you have basically a lot of different players coming together, right? It becomes a collaborative effort. So I know you're working with the military installation to determine more about the tracks themselves. Are you also working with any local tribes that are maybe interested in learning more about the tracks as well?
Well, yeah. I mean, the tribes, there are several of them that the military consults with. And so it is totally a collaborative effort. And we want the few tribal representatives came out to visit the site last year, and we are looking for them to come out and participate, even to what degree they want to this year. Yeah, that's really fulfilling, because seeing somebody see what they consider their direct ancestors in a place they still call home is a pretty cool thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, yeah, that's very, very cool. I totally agree with you. Sorry, I'm like nerding out a little bit. So that's pretty great. So when you're doing stuff like this, not every project, of course, is as interesting and as unique as this one. But, you mentioned your love for doing this work. And do you have advice for people who are maybe looking to come into this field, like maybe younger people who are considering it? Well, like, if there's something that you wish you had known when you were younger that you could tell them now?
Well, it's nothing you really want to do is ever easy, right? There's the fun stuff is what we're talking about now. I mean, you just have to really want it.
Mm-hmm.
Being an archaeologist and perhaps being many other environmental professional sorts isn't always, it's not the direct route to a pay level that rivals Wall Street or anything, but
right.
So you got to really want it.
Yeah.
And I mean, to make a whole career out of it, I think looking back on it, do I have a career as an archaeologist? Almost seems silly, like plan that up. But really, it's just because I wanted to do it. I was naive enough when I was young to just keep doing it. I didn't have anybody tell me I should be a lawyer or a banker or anything. And I'm dumb enough to just keep a job because I've got it. I really don't have better advice than that.
Yeah. No, that's perfect though. I think a lot of times we overthink it, and sometimes it's great not to. No, I think that's fantastic advice, but so I appreciate it. Now, one thing we do love asking our guests is stuff they do outside of the field as well, and kind of just fun facts about them. And one of the things you said was one of your interests is insects. So what does that mean? What do you like about insects?
Let's see. You asked me, so I said it. And I was like, as a teenager, I was in 4-H and, got into bug collecting. Maybe it sounds cooler now that I have a whole other job and, I'm an adult, but it didn't sound so cool when I was 15.
Right.
But it was something that I liked a lot. It got me outside. I still, and I'm still fascinated by it. I started to look into getting into entomology. I grew up in Stillwater, Oklahoma, which is where Oklahoma State University is. So they have a substantial agricultural program that entomology fits into. But
yeah,
I kind of got into it, and whereas my naive youth was, pith helmet and butterfly net roaming around in South America or something. It's really like, can you make a pesticide? I know that don't be mad at me, other people in the environmental field who I'm just, at the time I was young, I was like, this is what everything's kind of flowing me into. I don't really want to do that. I mean,
yeah. And
I was interested in archaeology, more interested. So it was a hobby. It was something that I'm still fascinated by. I follow like all these kind of into people on Twitter and stuff like that, because I just like it. I know all the backyard patterns of the bugs of my home. I do a little kind of fiddling with kind of macro photography and stuff with insects. I just find them interesting. I mean, they're like aliens.
Yeah, no, they really totally are. It's kind of like, what if our skeleton's on the outside? You're like, what? No, that's
I never asked that question, but that's pretty deep.
Yeah, right.
Or skin deep. I don't know.
Yeah, right. So, do you have a favorite? Is it an unfair question to ask you if you have like a favorite genre even of insects?
Oh yeah, I mean, monarch butterfly is my favorite insect across the board. But second is the praying mantis.
Oh yeah, both very interesting. Oh man, and praying mantis.
Yeah.
Speaking of alien, that is probably the most you can be.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, like I say, I appreciate it. I know we're getting close to the end of our time here, and it's been really fun talking with you and learning a lot more about what you do. But before we let you go, is there anything else you'd like to mention?
Let's see. We need more environmental professionals. So I hope that nothing I said didn't discourage anybody. But there's a lot. Business looks good for the next 5 years or something, and take advantage. Become an environmental professional.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I totally agree. And like I say, I really appreciate your time. But before we let you go, where can people get in touch with you?
On social media, I'm on LinkedIn. I have a Twitter account, but really I also, I have a page on our company's website, Far Western Anthropological Research Group, farwestern.com. There's a page, has my email. I'm easy to get hold of.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Daron, so much for being here. We had a great time.
All right. Thank you.
That's our show. Thank you, Daron, for joining us today. Please be sure to check us out each and every Friday. And don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. Bye.
See you, everybody.